Hey, this is Mike Rolih, founder and CEO at GoRout, and this is the Sports Business Conversations podcast from ADC Partners.
Hi, this is Dave Almy of ADC Partners, and thanks for taking time to check out this latest episode of the Sports Business Conversations podcast. Hope you like what you hear. If you do, please leave a comment or rating, and that's always appreciated. So, a little personality quirk about me: I love to drive. It's super meditative. On a long road trip, I'll turn off the radio and just cruise in silence. It's one of the few times you can really just let your brain unspool for a bit. This episode's guest also loves to drive. In fact, Mike Rolih, the founder and CEO of GoRout, loves driving so much he became a limo driver after his baseball playing career wound down. He'd spend hours driving, thinking about what his next career step might be. And then inspiration struck. After stopping to watch a friend coach a high school football practice, Rolih was taken aback by how a smoothly running practice descended into chaos when it became time to learn new plays. Surely, he thought, there's a better way to do this. And so, the lifelong tinkerer began working on what eventually would become GoRout, a technology company that's taking the football, baseball, and softball worlds by storm. Our conversation is a must-listen for any would-be entrepreneurs, as Rolih talks about lessons learned throughout the development and go-to-market phases. He recounts some early hurdles, how he develops his sales teams, his pivots, and where things head from here for his exploding company. So thanks for listening to my interview with Mike Rolih, founder and CEO of GoRout. Hope you enjoy. Mike, I read the SBJ article about you and GoRout, and I have to admit that I kind of fell in love with the first sentence of the article, right? It's like Mike Rolih was just a limo driver with an idea. And I felt like that kind of set such a great tone for going into a bit of the origin story about you and GoRout. So can you provide a little bit of background and some insight into the aha moment that led to the creation of what would become GoRout? So give me a little bit of backstory, if you would.
Yeah, so the limo driving thing actually happened. It was more of a need because we had just moved to Minnesota.
Okay.
And we lived in Chicago. I was in pro baseball. I was doing a couple different things for some organizations. We want to start having a family. My wife was like, I want to be closer to mine. So we moved to Minnesota. And I'm a tinkerer. I like to build things and play with things. I have all kinds of projects running all the time, right?
So you were a Lego kid. You were always building stuff.
Yeah, all kinds of random stuff, right? Like nets, ropes and trees, like all kinds of different stuff, all my life. Well, we finally were out of a condo and into our own home, and we moved to Minnesota. And I was great at doing something about 80% of the way there, and then I'll get to the thing later.
There's a guy that lawnmower is in the garage a little bit disassembled.
Yeah, like she's just like, you need to just get out of the house and go do something. So we moved to Minnesota. Financially, we were in a position where I could say, okay, we sold the condo. We can take a minute here. We can take a break. Like, let's just figure out what we want to be for the next couple of years. And she was like, you need to go figure out what you're going to be, but you can't be here when you're doing that.
So was the baseball career over at this time? Were you stepping back from baseball, or were you still playing?
No, I was done playing, and everything was done and wrapped up. And I was done coaching. I was done scouting. Like I put baseball behind me. I was kind of out of the game altogether.
Got it.
And so I was like, well, I need to figure out what I want to do. I like driving. Like, I have no issue driving for 5-6 hours at a time. Like, I'm happy to do it. It's just a good time to just really go very inside of my own brain and think through things.
Very meditative.
Yeah, it really is. Like, and there's nothing better than just knowing that it's a straight path from where you're going, A to B, and you can just kind of zone out and just put the thing on cruise and go. And so I took this job driving limo because it was just an opportunity for me to do that. And
And we're talking about a long stretch black limousine or town car here. This is not Uber. This is not
Right.
none of those. This is the traditional limo driver process is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I was actually what I was doing. I was working for a limo service, and while I was just grabbing people from Mayo Clinic and taking them up to the Minneapolis airport, which is an hour and 20 minutes away.
Okay, yeah.
And then coming back and forth, picking people up, bringing them back there, back and forth. So it's just a Lincoln Town car, very easy to drive. Like,
and you're on autopilot. You're going between Mayo and the airport.
Right. That was it. And the idea was behind all of it was if I did come up with an idea, the chances that I would be able to engage with somebody that I was driving, strike up a conversation, like strategically, it was like, well, if they're taking a limo from A to B, at least they're going to be willing to be somebody maybe I'd want to have a conversation with.
Sure.
So I'm doing this. I'm doing it for maybe 6 months to a year, couple times a week. And a buddy of mine gets a coaching job at a junior college here in town, RCTC. Go out and watch them practice.
Just rolled a limo right up to the front door.
No, I took my own car for these. But I went out and watched him practice. And he was I want to throw the ball a bunch of times. Mike Leach spread me out, throw the ball over. And they got to the part of practice where they were prepping and repping for the next opponent. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday preparation. And all of a sudden, what was operating as a very fine-tuned machine started to turn into chaos and breakdown and screaming and expletives. It went from being like, oh, this is actually really fun to watch to what the hell are they doing?
I think everybody who's ever coached who's listening to this right now is getting a little cold sweat about finding that finely tuned practice plan starting to dissolve in front of their eyes.
And it happens every week.
Yeah.
Because you're having players run plays that aren't things that you're teaching or coaching, right? They're running the opposition's sets.
Right. You have to basically provide the competitor's look for your team.
Yep. And so you're holding up a piece of paper with 11 drawings on it, and you're having a bunch of players, 18 to 22, stand around who have the attention span of a Twitter post, right? 140 characters. And you're trying to explain to them what you need them to do. Ugh. And then they turn around and they go back to the line of scrimmage and they try to run the play. And it's just the translation, it was just such.
Yeah, probably 40% effective.
Right. Yeah. And so I just simply was like, okay, this is a problem. And I went on to my buddy and I was like, wow, this practice sucks. Like, how are you still doing things that we did back in 1995 in high school? Like, how is this not evolved?
How has this not moved anywhere?
Right. And there were really three options. Do it the way they were doing it. Give more coaches paper so they could talk to less kids, like section it out, outside left, outside right, in the box. Or they could spend time drawing these really intricate diagrams. And they were a junior college. They didn't have staff on site all day.
Right, this is very
they didn't
DIY.
have resources to do all that.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, there's got to be something better. So I went to a bunch of different high schools in the area and watched them practice too. And they all had a very similar problem. Kind of that same window of practice. You could almost see it coming.
Did you, at this point, when you were going around to the other schools and seeing the same problem being replicated over and over again, did you start to get excited? Did you start to think, hey, there's a problem here I can solve? Or had it not come to you yet?
It hadn't come to me yet.
Yeah.
I just knew that there was chaos there and that there was an organizational mechanism that needed to be applied.
Okay.
That's all I knew. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how it was going to turn up.
Okay. So how did you start to attack the problem then?
So it was funny. I was actually sitting at the Minneapolis airport in between two drives. And I was on my phone. And I don't know if I was on Twitter or what I was on, but a Madden video game popped up. And I turned my phone sideways and I was like, I wanted to look at it was like some YouTuber or somebody was doing something.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, that's the idea. They have this information already drawn up. Why don't we just have them send it from the people who have it to the people who need it? Like, we've been making phone calls and radio calls and all kinds of things for hundreds of years now, or 100 years. Why can't we just do this with a football play? Like, it was just a very much like, well, you idiot, you should have seen that immediately.
Yeah, but by that logic, there's millions of people who should have seen it beforehand. So, right.
Well, it's so funny because the first couple of years of us having started this, so many people came up to us and said, I had that same idea. Right. And I always equate it to the, not that we're in anywhere comparison, but the example is very much like the Steve Jobs iPhone. It was like, well, BlackBerry almost got there, and Palm Pilot almost got there, but Steve Jobs, no, we're going to do it this way.
Okay. So for those, it's real quick though, Mike, because I think it's valuable at this point for people who are unfamiliar with GoRout. Can you talk a little bit about what it is and how you solved that, or are in the process of solving that practice chaos that's going on? What was the result?
Yeah. So what I ended up building was effectively the first wearable coach to player communication system.
Okay. So, right.
It was a wearable display.
Okay.
Where instead of like traditional NFL, you talk to somebody in their ear and they hear it, the play call. This was a display screen. This was an image that would show up on a device for each player and allow that player to see precisely what their responsibility was for that play.
Yeah.
Without having to come back to a huddle, without having to have a coach sit down and walk you through each individual step. It was just, the way I equated it was like, it was literally Twitter for a football player. It was bite-sized bit of information. I'm the X receiver. I don't have to look at the whole card. I just need to look at the X.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing too, the way that how people learn also, right? Because I'll speak personally, right? If I go into a group of people and somebody walks me through something, there's a 10% success rate. I'm a visual guy. And I think a lot of athletes are trained because so much of the sport is visual.
Right.
Right. There's a success rate that they have by applying their visual acuity. So like that ability to learn, not only just like a learning style, but that's the medium with which they're now accustomed.
Well, and you got to remember, most of the people that were, especially the kids today coming up, they've never lived their lives without a visual component for communication in their hands.
Yeah, that's the expectation.
Right. So, yeah, their predominant learning modality is going to be a visual methodology.
Yeah.
Because they live 100% of their lives in that method. You could see a whole group of teenagers sitting around each other, not saying a word, but they're all slacking each other, or they're all snapping each other, or sending text back and forth. And so in my mind, if that's how they're already consuming information, why don't we just do it that way?
Yeah, rather than trying to channel them into a way that they're unaccustomed to learning, why don't we actually create a system that channels back towards the way that they expect to learn? But you're talking about a technology, you're talking about hardware, right? Yeah. You have a system, you have a company and a product that is hardware related, and you're starting up, and there's a classic expression in the startup world is hardware is hard.
Yes.
So, and there's a lot of reasons for that, right? It's expensive, it's complex, and you're talking about something that's being inserted into football, which, requires a certain amount of ruggedness to it. So as you think about the, where you started with this process and where you are now, I'm interested in what you think you've learned about developing GoRout, and what do you think other people who are thinking about hardware? Because like you said, everybody had the idea,
right?
But what are some of the things that you've learned about the development of the product that are?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would tell anybody is just be a SaaS company.
First recommendation is don't do it.
And I'm going to be very frank about this. We don't look at ourselves as a hardware company.
Okay.
Hardware really is just the medium for us to display all of the things that we do from a SaaS perspective.
All the content, right?
Yeah. But it's a necessary evil because you can't take a computer out of the field, right? So, I guess you could. It just would be a bad look. And so my methodology on the hardware side And it started all the way back from that first time that I was like, oh, I got to build something. Was I don't want to spend time building components. I want to spend time building software and networks and and connectivity. I don't want to build the thing. And so we really spent a lot of our time figuring out how to simply de-risk that aspect, right? Because every investor that we've ever spoken with, their first objection has always been, well, you've got hardware. Hold on. Let me walk you through what this actually means. And so very early on in our existence, I spent a lot of my time focused on building relationships with people who were already making hardware and figuring out how to make it fit into our ecosystem. Right.
So you're not building from scratch. You're like, how can this existing product be retooled for my need?
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. And that's
so it's more like a systems engineer challenge than anything else.
Yeah, because you got to really de-risk, right? Because you could spend 100% of all your capital building something that you get back in and you realize you left a button out.
Oh God, I think I just got a cold sweat.
Yeah, it's the scariest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And so from my side, it was like, okay, how can we keep talking with people who are already making stuff for other industries, other uses, and figuring out just simply how to repurpose.
Right, just retool it. Just that little bit, that tweak.
Right. And so what we got real good at was writing firmware, building tools that would allow us to say, okay, this form factor really fits our methodology. It lives up to the things that we need to make, how we need it to perform. It's got all the components that we're looking for. Can you now load this firmware into it and let us test it? And after you run your test, it's like, hey, this works. Let's strike a wholesale agreement. Let's strike some type of sales opportunity where we're moving your stuff, but it's brand, whatever. And that leads you into a whole different series of opportunities, right? So now, we've got our own custom casings being made that wrap the devices. So, like when I talk with people, they're always like, well, you got your football scout product. Like those, you got to just be replacing them all the time. And I just went through this. In the last 5 years, we replaced 4.
Out of how many units? I mean, that's like percentage, like
30,000.
Yeah. Okay. That's a pretty good rate of success.
Yeah. And so it's just once you find what you're looking for, understanding how to really get it to do what you need it to do.
Yeah.
And if you can't, you just keep looking.
No, it's interesting, right? Because you're talking about, like, certainly building the software and writing the firmware, to your point. That's its own challenge. It presents its unique challenge too. But sounds like the equal part of the effort was just put into going and figuring out where is the existing technology that you can use.
Yeah.
And just being really adept at going out and exploring the market.
Yeah. And just understanding how to source.
Yeah.
That's really it. It was just really figuring out what made sense and then how can we leverage it.
I'm wondering if there was a unique moment or a particular challenge in the development of GoRout that you take unique pride in overcoming. Was there like how the expletive are we going to solve this? And then getting to the other side of that and being like, man, we did that. That was pretty impressive.
There were so many.
Which one do you want?
I'll tell you a really funny story. So when we first started this, it's really 2 stories. When we first started this, we started trying doing it on like a local Wi-Fi system. And we built this box. Looks like an electrical box. And you open it up and there's like a small little mini server and wires and everything, right? Well, the first time I took that through the airport, right? TSA scanned it and I had to take it into another room. They're like, what is this? And I had a feeling that was going to happen. So I had a bunch of documentation to show them circuitry and all these different things. Like, this is really what it is.
Yeah.
Go ahead and analyze it. And
carefully and gently, please.
Yeah. Yes. Just safe. But so we started with this local Wi-Fi box. And in our first year, 2016 was like kind of our proof of concept year. We sold a handful of college teams. And one team in particular, Arkansas State, Blake Anderson was there. Parks Frazier, who was with the Colts for a long time, was his chief head of technology, and he was a graduate coach. And Arkansas State was a really interesting layout. They wanted to be able to practice on their grass practice field, which was on the one side of the stadium.
Oh, okay.
They wanted to practice on the inside of the stadium, and they wanted to practice on their indoor on the back side of the other side of the stadium.
Yeah, that's a tough ask for a Wi-Fi.
Yes. And there just happened to be like 85 networks in the area.
Oh, God.
So we show up to Arkansas State, and this is we didn't have, like, Blake was just like, figure out how to make it work.
So he's the ultimate great customer, right? He's saying, go ahead and use us as a more or less a template. I just want it to work. Yeah,
but we were ultimately not the great product for him to do.
Right.
Like,
yep.
it wasn't a great situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I had one guy with me, and then we had another guy that showed up, and I literally had these guys in like 100-foot booms going onto the scoreboards, like hooking up routers, and like none of this was approved by the university to do, or like we were just out there doing it.
Yeah, the campus IT department would have just had a heart attack.
Yeah, like it was not a great situation.
Yeah.
And I remember after it was all done, we got it set up, and I realized that it just was not going to work.
Right. Because you could be doing this for every possible client because everybody's got their unique twist on this.
Right. Yeah, it was not scalable. And then just with the elemental conditions of local Wi-Fi, just were not going to allow it to do what we wanted to do. And I remember sitting, it was if it was 100 degrees that day, it was so hot. I remember sitting in Blake Anderson's office with my hands in my face, my face in my hands, and I'm like, Blake, 1, this isn't going to work, and 2, I got to go figure out what I'm going to do next. Because I was like, I can't do this for everybody. Like, it's just not going to work.
Was it a little panicky?
Oh, I was freaked out.
You were.
I didn't know. I didn't know what to do.
More than a little panicky.
This whole thing is going to end today.
This is the underlying technology for the whole thing here.
Right.
Okay.
And so it didn't work. And so I had to kind of go back to the drawing board. And the first real big milestone that we had to overcome was figuring out how to avoid these networking components, these networking issues. And that's when we made the decision, ultimately, through great relationships that we had with Verizon, we switched over to a 4G IoT type platform. And that's where a lot of this started to go from it started to take off. Is that we were able to build now all of our systems to run on an IoT cloud-based platform that was using cellular technology.
So you stripped Wi-Fi out of the equation altogether. Yeah.
And it was a complete rework of all of the components to do all the different things that we needed to do.
That's such a hard decision, though, too, right? Because you've obviously invested time, energy, and capital into building a Wi-Fi based system. There's this inflection point where you have to go, do I keep dumping money, time, and resource into fixing the existing system, or do I go back to, like, to your point, back to the drawing boards? That's a hard moment.
It is. And it's not fun.
No.
But it's also a necessary evil. We always say in our organization that we're an organization of ideas, and the best idea always wins. Doesn't matter who it comes from. And I don't take credit for many ideas in the organization, because I think I've hired really great people to be around me and let them do their jobs. But that was the one time where I told engineering, and it was me and 2 other guys that were sitting around writing the code all day. I said, guys, we're scrapping it all and restarting it over, and we're building it completely with the idea of being light and free-flowing and focusing on an IoT type platform. And we're going to use cellular as the backbone. But once we did that, that's where the scale started to happen. That's where we started to really grow, is because it was repeatable, it was scalable, and it was a structured backbone that we could rely on every single day to deliver a performance metric that we could at least categorize and say, we feel very good about this.
Versus rolling into a school and saying, okay, how are we going to jury rig a communication system to be able to figure this out? We've got it baked in.
Right. Yep. And it actually removed another massive barrier, which was all the school IT departments, because now we didn't have to touch their infrastructure. So we didn't have to go through all of the technology reviews and all the technology compliance stuff that institutions generally require you to go through.
Right, because you're basically a walled garden at that point, right? I mean, you're your own standalone system.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it solved problems that we didn't realize we were solving later down the line as we started to go into Michigan or University of Alabama or some of the best high schools in the country, where their technology departments are very much like, we want to have our hands on everything. We could actually literally tell them, you don't need to have your hands on anything.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So you've developed this product, you start to get success, you see how you can start to scale it, but you'd also run up against your market, right? Because coaches could be a little set in their ways.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, not always the most like, oh, yeah, tell me what technology is going to help me out, right? They have process, they have ways they like to do things. So it's one thing to have the technology, it's a whole other thing to sell it in. So can you talk a little bit about that, how you started to work with coaches, the messages that you were finding useful that were breaking through to the kinds of people you wanted to reach with the product that you were putting together?
So yes, in the sports technology world, the single biggest mistake most companies start out making is when they want to start to grow, they go and hire salespeople. What we did, what I wanted to do, the strategy I wanted to deploy was I wanted to go hire coaches. When we walk into a room, any football room in the country, our sales guys, Jeff Thorne, D3 National Championship head coach, Shane Hurd, FCS National Champion coordinator, Drew Robinson was at a DFO and assistant director of operations and a coach at 4 different Division Ones. I have quarterback coaches from Division One programs on our sales staff. When they walk into any football room in the country, they can get on the board. They can break down film. They can talk to people in a way that allows coaches to relax and understand that this isn't just selling you a technology. This is selling you a technology that we understand wraps around your process, doesn't require you to change your process. And we use a really big saying when we talk with coaches all the time, is that our technology actually bends to the will of the user. It doesn't require the user to bend to the will of technology. We're not locking you in. So if you hand draw your cards, you can hand draw them. If you use a certain drawing software, you can use that software and put everything into our system. And that was one of the best decisions we ever made, was ensuring that when you go in and talk with a coach, because you're 100% right. Like, I just got back yesterday from one of the biggest football coaches clinic in the country, AFCA. We're down in Charlotte this year. And 90% of the conversations that we had with our existing users were, well, we're doing it this way now. How do we do it this way with your system? Right? Because they're never going to change their process. They're going to change the components that they use around the process. And so we had to build a system that was very dynamic, that got coaches to understand that it wasn't about us, it's always about you. And when you have a coach-peer conversation between the sales rep and the actual person you're trying to sell, and they've both been coaches, there's a level of respect and a level of understanding there that immediately brings the guard down and just starts to talk about how does it solve your problem.
I mean, it makes so much sense on the face of it, just from a credibility standpoint. Right. Hey, man, we've been in the same. I speak your language. I'm doing the same thing. I've seen how, this job works. Like you said, they can just go up to the board and start diagramming plays. But I'm also struck by there's not much of a delta between a coach and a salesperson. Right. Because what is a coach doing all day long? They're selling culture. They're selling performance. They're selling recruiting. I mean, there's a bigger sales job in the world than recruiting. I don't know what is. So I want to, people I think sometimes have this negative interpretation of the phrase salesperson, but really a coach falls very, very close to what the objectives that you were looking for. They just came with an entirely baked in language to be able to support what you were trying to do. So I can only imagine that was successful, and you're seeing the outcomes associated with that.
Yeah, but that's where it really matters, right? Is that if you bring in somebody from the outside, their language doesn't match. So they immediately lose credibility, right? It's, well, you're just telling me what you want to tell me. And most times they'll focus on speeds and feeds. or why does this or this does that, versus the underlying problem of this is really what it's going to do for you.
Yeah, features, not
How to
outcomes.
relate that down.
Yeah. I wonder, you talked about being client-centric and adapting to the needs of a client. I'm interested have you ever been surprised by how customers end up using the product that you didn't expect?
I actually think that's more the norm than the exception. So many times customers, coaches, teams call in and they're like, hey, have you guys ever done it this way? And they show us this whole nother way of doing something that we've never even thought about, right? That happens all the time. And it's awesome when it happens because it does show how dynamic and really how diverse the thought processes are out there around this very similar same game, right? Notre Dame and Ohio State are going to play this coming up week. Those coaching staffs approach what they're doing very differently, from practice to structure to everything that goes into the secret sauce of their programs. But how they prepare, the way they look at things, the way they structure things is so much different than the other one. And we see that all the time. Where we've actually seen more of that, even in the football space, where we've seen more of that has been in our new releases with our Diamond product.
Okay.
How coaches are communicating defensive plays, or how they're communicating a pitch call and then a back pick, or how they're shifting their outfield around. Very, very interesting stuff that we never really intended the system to function as, but they've made it work for what they're trying to do. And then we're really learning back about, well, how can we make that even easier for you to do? And that's the cycle of this whole process that I absolutely will be in love with till the day I die, is how do I continue to iterate, innovate, and move the product forward because the users said it needs to do it this way, not us. That's the best part of my job.
Sometimes the influence also comes from circumstances. So I'm interested in your perspective on, because in 2023, Michigan got embroiled in a sign stealing scandal.
Yeah.
What's been the impact when that happened? What was the impact on GoRout, and how have you seen tweaks, adjustments to the product to address what is now a very overt concern?
Yeah,
that it hasn't been in the past, but now it's a very overt concern about that kind of, well, let's call it what it is. Call it cheating. So how does your product address that?
So a couple of things. One, we were already having discussions with every conference and the NCAA, along with the NAIA, junior college, etc., about an in-game solution back in February of 23. Well before the Michigan stuff happened. With the Michigan scenario, what all that did was it was really the catalyst that allowed the NCAA to say, yes, we've got to do something now.
Yeah, okay. Clearly this is now a problem that we're not whispering about anymore.
Exactly. Yep. Everybody knew it was a problem.
Yep.
But nobody took it to those extremes, right? Like sign stealing, just like in baseball, is part of the game. It's been part of the game for however long they've been playing, since Newt Rockne was around.
Since people learned how to bang a stick against a garbage can.
You said that, not me.
We're provocative here, Mike. We're provocative.
Anyway, we were already having the conversation. The NCAA was already very much interested in this. Now, you want to talk about another thing to overcome. We were preparing, and we're prepared for the NCAA to approve in-helmet audio and a wearable solution in February of 24 at the Rules Committee. Well, they only ended up approving in-helmet audio for only FBS teams alone. Everybody else was kind of left to still go back to doing it the way they were doing it.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of conferences and a lot of teams and a lot of leagues that were wanting a wearable solution, mainly because, and I think you're already seeing it, you saw it this year, is talking to your quarterback is great. There's so much value in doing that. Talking to your Mike linebacker is great. But if you watch a college sideline, you still have 4 guys wearing different colored jerseys signaling in. You still have poster boards. You still have the sailboat ships. The guys are hanging up the sails to try to prevent people from still videoing the signs. So
It's very 19th century stuff.
Yeah. And they didn't solve the problem. Um, and so the NCAA not giving us approval in February of 24 may have been the single greatest advantage we've ever received, though. It was
All
a
right.
blessing in disguise.
Because
It gave us an opportunity to really, really focus in on the user and making sure this thing is absolutely bulletproof.
yeah.
We were awarded a waiver by the NCAA to run an in-game trial with the Liberty League in New York this fall, the D3 league. They can only use them in conference.
Former Liberty League athlete right here on the
There you go.
microphone with you.
We're at
Vassar College, baby.
okay.
This is back in the days when I think we used smoke signals to communicate between coaches and players. But so continue, please. I just got excited at hearing Liberty League.
So they approved it, and so we rolled it out to the teams that were in that league. Each team got 10 devices, 2 tablets to send from, and the feedback we received was, "We need more."
Hey, okay.
And
kind of the dream scenario.
Outstanding feedback, and again, the Michigan stuff was just the thing that made it necessary to do. It was the NCAA's wanted to do it, but now they've really realized that they have to do it.
Great catalyst.
The alternatives that are coming out of it, right? In helmet versus wearables. It's going to be very interesting to how it all impacts the game moving forward.
So you're at the intersection of 2 very, very, very dynamic industries, right? Sports changing all the time, particularly now, right? Where this period in sports business is nuts. Yep. And technology isn't exactly known for sitting still and looking at its shoes. How hard, difficult, fun is it to watch the changes in those particular industries and living at the intersection of those, making sure GoRout is taking into account everything that's happening and adapting the system to be able to address them?
Yeah, that's a very complex question and a more complex answer probably. No. We spend an egregious amount of our time self-reflecting at our company. We very rarely worry about the shifting landscape underneath our feet or what competitors may or may not be doing. And the reason is that as 92% of all the people in our company are athletes, they are college athletes, high school athletes, college coaches. In any organization where you're competitive like that, you prepare for what's you're going to see, but you internally always worry about what you can control. And for us, we spend so much time asking ourselves, what can we pull out of our products? What can we remove that might be a barrier to the user experience or an entry point for the user to become a part of us? That we actually spend very little time worried about what the markets are doing or what the competitors or what the landscape is or how it's changing. Now, that's internally. I spend a lot of my time keeping an eye out for who I would consider to be movers and shakers in the industry. What are they focusing on? Not today, but when I have conversations with other CEOs or like-minded individuals, 12, 18, 24 months from now, what are you guys really focusing on? And trying to just really get a sense from their perspective of where do they see the longer term growth in these spaces? Right now, there's a ton of movement in the diamond space. There's been a lot of shifting around about analytics and pitch intent tracking, and we're doing some really, really interesting things that we've never done before. And we've, with our partnership with a company called Aware, we have analytics coming out that have never been produced. And we're getting really excited to put those out there for customers. And so we're trying where we can to try to stay ahead of what might be coming, or think about what would our users want that our users didn't know. Internally, I kind of use that as the Steve Jobs iPad strategy. No one knew that they needed an iPad until Steve Jobs said, here's an iPad. And everybody figured out what to do with it. We're very much, I try to keep us very much in that same mindset of let's show the users what's possible, and then let them tell us how they want to use it.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what you said earlier about, man, there are all kinds of ways that people are using our technology that we had no idea, right? The answers don't always live within the four walls of the company, right? So the customers are always going to be able to come back and they're going to be your greatest innovators.
And we spend a ton of time. So we just redid, we launched our Diamond product in August of 23. We signed over 1,800 schools in our first year of Diamond. Brand new schools, D1 schools, club teams, travel teams, whatever. Most people at that point would look at themselves and say, we are crazy if we're making any changes. And in the summer, we rewrote the entire platform because we surveyed and got responses back from more than 1,000 coaches. And they said, we'd like to see this or this adjusted or this layout. And we took all that feedback in, listened to it, made the adjustments, and rewrote the platform to incorporate all of those different elements. And I think if you're going to really stay ahead in this space, you have to understand how to listen to your user, because they're going to guide you. They're not going to tell you what to create, but once you've created it, they're going to tell you how to make it the best it possibly can be. And if you can do that, you're going to stay ahead in your individual niche, and you're going to work faster than sitting there and, like you said, in the four walls trying to think about what's next.
It's a great source of inspiration to the people who are outside using the product in ways that you'd never, ever conceived that.
That's right.
From the start of the launch of the product. I'm with Mike Rolih. He's the CEO and founder of GoRout. Mike, I want to say thanks so much for the time. It's been a great and fascinating discussion. Before I let you go, though, I'm going to put you in the lightning round. Okay. These are a series. You seem relaxed about the lightning round, and I want to caution you that the lightning round is anything but relaxing.
Okay.
Mike, are you ready?
Well, let's do it.
All right, let's do this thing. Lightning round with Mike Rolih. Best coaching advice you ever received as a player?
Be better. Don't suck as much. Try to be better.
You know, it's pretty fundamental to the coaching playing experience. All right. You are a self-described deep dish pizza expert. What are your accreditations?
My DoorDash bill.
Yeah, okay, that's probably mine as well. But is there so is this like deep dish is just that much better than thin crust, or where does the expertise focus on?
Growing up in Chicago, right? That's just kind of our thing.
Yeah,
that's what you do. It's either that or bar pizza, and for the longest time, I'm a big Lou Malinati's guy. So if there's an NIL deal out there as an old athlete for Lou Malinati's, hey guys, send it over my way.
All right. So if you're listening, we know you just asked me for the contact information and help you out there. All right. Best limo driver story.
Well, it'd be driving George Fisher from the former CEO at Motorola. And that's how this all got started. We struck up a relationship. He came back into town a couple of times. I said, every time he comes in, I want to drive him. He was a minority owner of the Arizona Diamondbacks. So we had a lot of different connections and ways to strike up communication, and ultimately became a mentor to me, and then ultimately wrote the first investment check to get this off the ground. So that's a good limo driver story. $30 or $50. He gave me a lot of money to start a business. So that was the best. That would be the best story.
Yeah, I think going away, that's probably the best story. What is the name of your English bulldog, and does he look like Winston Churchill?
My English bulldog's name is Wrigley, after Wrigley.
Okay.
While he doesn't look like Winston Churchill, he does enjoy smoking cigars with me, like Winston Churchill would have.
Okay. So he has Churchillian qualities. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
All right. Last one. I mean, honestly, how far away are we from AI just doing all the play calling in football and baseball?
There are predictive models that are coming in the next 12 to 24 months. That'll be available. It'll just be a matter of how fast do the rule makers decide to allow things like this in.
Mike Rolih, CEO and founder of GoRout. I really appreciate the time, man. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. It was awesome.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the One-on-One Sports Business Conversations podcast. If you enjoyed it, we always appreciate a subscribe, share, comment, or like. And don't forget, you can always find past episodes at abcpartners.com/podcast. This podcast is written, produced, edited, and hosted by Dave Almy. And theme music was composed by Scott Holmes.